Good Yontif, everybody. It is, it's wonderful to see you all, and it is my particular honor to introduce our teacher this afternoon, Rabbi Dr. Lawrence Hoffman. He is now the emeritus professor of liturgy and worship at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. But when I was in school, he was my great teacher. He not only is an expert on the Siddur and all of the rabbinic literature that goes into creating the Siddur, but he's also an extraordinary scholar of contemporary Jewish life. He's one of the rare individuals who has the ability to look at the depth and look into the depth of our tradition and help us apply it to the challenges of American Jewish life today. And so he's someone I have not just called on to help guide me in the construct of worship. He, in fact, was the one who was the architect for the 180th anniversary service that we all enjoyed last spring. But he's someone I've also turned to, and our Board of Trustees has turned to help guide this congregation so that it is best positioned to answer the challenges of contemporary Jewish life. More than anything, he is my friend, and I am always honored to be able to share him with my beloved congregation. So please join me in welcoming Rabbi Dr. Lawrence Hoffman. And his theme today, you know it because you chose it, is Why Reform Judaism Matters, a Yom Kippur retrospective on the essence of Reform Judaism. Larry, Gamar Chatima Tova.
I come here because of you. I come here because I love this congregation. And I also come here to be introduced so nicely. I mean, after all, thank you very much. This is a great congregation, and it's being led by a great rabbi, as you well know. So I thank him for taking time out of what is actually a quite busy day, as you can imagine, to actually introduce me. So thank you very much. My goal today is to talk about Reform Judaism. I've discovered that people don't really think about what it is very much anymore. In fact, there are some people who think, what, do we need denominations? I mean, aren't we past denominational time? I mean, I'm just Jewish. Indeed, if you take the Pew survey, every so often they survey Jews, and what we discover is that often Jews say, well, I'm just Jewish. They don't identify with any movement. I believe that the denomination reform matters greatly. It means something. It is significant. So today what I'm going to do is not give you the whole history of reform. That would be too much. And anyway, history of 150 years ago or so, I'm poor at mathematics. It could be 200 and something, actually, come to think of it. But I'm not going to run through the whole history. I do want to tell you about how it began, a couple of things like that. But mostly I'm interested in what is reform? I mean, as a type of Judaism, what's the point of it? And so I want to get below the level of individual historical events and talk about why we are reformed today. What is the position of reform, not just here in America, but what is it through time? And we'll see that reform is an attitude that changes through time, but the attitude, because it has to respond to different circumstances, but the attitude towards Judaism and towards the world is what remains constant. And I have this complicated piece of paper that you're holding in your hand. It's a chart, as you can see. Someone said to me, I don't understand a word on it. That's good, I said, because otherwise I would have nothing to say. You could just take it and read it. So it'll help us in what we're doing. If you don't have one of these, I'll put them over here. Can you help yourself, please? Take one of those pieces of paper. Thank you very much. So, quickly, how does reform begin? Reform Judaism starts at the beginning of the 19th century. Jews had been freed from the ghettos by Napoleon, And Napoleon told them they could stay as long as they were a religion. He wanted to know, if you're a nationality, then what are you going to do here? But if you're like Protestants and Catholics and Jews, if you are a religion, then we have a place for you. And they were very smart, these Jews. They decided, yes, we are a religion. And that's how Judaism became a religion. Until then, we had called ourselves a people. In other words, there's much more to it than religion, and there is today too. But at the time, they had to affirm we are a religion most of all, and that meant they had to have divine services. They needed to have a synagogue that kind of looked more or less like this to the extent that they could afford it, and they wanted to look like what Protestants and Catholics did so they could stay and not be kicked out of the empire by Napoleon. The question was, who would be in charge of this religion? And one of the problems was that the religion of the past tended to be old, medieval, call it medieval Judaism, not orthodoxy, mind you, medieval. And it was run by these rabbis who, by and large, were interested in Jewish law, and their usual answer, as it were, to what can we do was no. Now, by contrast, the people of the early 19th century were coming into their own. They were now admitted into Napoleon's empire. Even after Napoleon was gone, they were now part of the French or the German, wherever it was in Europe. They were part of modern society. How could they have a religion that allowed them to have one foot in the world and yet have one foot still back in Judaism? And that was the question that founded reform. At the first half of the century, the 19th century, really even beyond it, into the later second half, there were no denominations. There were just old-time rabbis who believed nothing should change, and new rabbis who thought something should change but disagreed as to how much and what. And in fact, more than the rabbis drove this, lay people drove it. Very often in Jewish history, lay people don't have patience with rabbis. And they wanted something to change. So the very earliest synagogues, if you like, that were reformed, were actually run by lay people who said, I'm not going to wait for you to decide that Jewish law allows us to have modern worship. We're just going to do it. Eventually, the rabbis get on board, and they say, you know, there's something to this. And now a whole raft of rabbis begin discussing it, and now they take leadership, and now reform begins. But in that period of time, really what we're talking about is a strategy. How can Jews survive in modern life? That's the question. And the issue was only how much can we change, not whether we will. Those who would not change at all mostly are gone. Modern Orthodoxy, conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism are all part of the response to modernity. How much can we change, and what shall we change? Now, that alone is a great story. I'd love to tell you more about the story, but I really want to jump to today, and I want to talk about the underlying philosophy of the thing. In a way, all three of those were reformers. Even modern Orthodoxy was a reform, because they weren't going to live like medieval Jews. We tend to think that modern Orthodoxy is a continuation of the Middle Ages, but that is not true. All of the modern denominations are breaks with the Middle Ages, and yet an attempt to recapture the history and the traditions of Judaism in a new way. We just do it differently. Which is why, to this day, modern Orthodox rabbis, conservative rabbis, Reform rabbis, Reconstructionist rabbis, we get along just fine. We may have trouble with some of the right-wingers in Israel who think that none of this was appropriate and wish they could go back to Poland in the 18th century. What then is reform as an idea beyond that? Let me start by thinking about Jewish history with you. If Jewish history has Jews throughout it, this cannot be the only time, nor Germany the only time in the 19th century. That can't be the only time that we were trying to find our footing in a new kind of world. Yes, that's the first time what we call modernity struck. Modernity has to do with the Enlightenment values of the 18th century, with the discovery of science in the 17th century. But before that, of course, Jews are always moving around. If you go back to Maimonides, for example, in the 12th century, Moses Maimonides was a great philosopher who read Aristotle and who loved Aristotle. And he talked to Muslim philosophers as well. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish philosophers shared a great deal at the time because they were in their own kind of modernity. They were enjoying a very break in the Middle Ages in which thought was important and people actually got along with one another. There were other times too, obviously, not necessarily so happy times. The Crusades, for example, decimated Jews in Germany. What happens when you lose 10%, 20% of your population? Well, you get up, and you end up with a new kind of Judaism because it has to respond to the new thing that's just happened. So I could go through Jewish history and say, look, there are all these different times when we were challenged as to how we could change to meet the moment. Whether it was a happy moment like the philosophical Middle Ages of Maimonides, or whether it was a terrible time when Jews were almost wiped out by crusaders. Something had to change. And regularly in the Middle Ages, I shouldn't say middle-aged Jews, right? Middle Ages Judaism met the moment. So now let me draw in the air for you a model. I'd like you to picture a square. And below that, there's another square. One of the squares, the top one, is going to represent society at any given time. And below it is going to represent Judaism. Now imagine a series of these squares, one on top of the other, that stretches through time. Each one represents a new era with a challenge. The top square is the host society. The bottom square is Jews. Now, Jews in the bottom square have developed a kind of Judaism that fits with the society above, right? Now, what happens when you jump 500 or 200 years, and suddenly the host society is really different? Something has happened to move it to a new era. Jews move with it. Sometimes it's in the same place. Often if not, and I'm going to come to this later, often if not, it has to do with moving. Jews have moved to somewhere. Let's say they had been in Muslim Spain and suddenly Spain becomes Christian. Aha, that's a movement, isn't it? Or let's say they have moved to Germany from Italy, which is what happened. Well, that's a movement geographically as well. At any rate, at various times in history, the host society, that top square, changes. Jews from the lower box move with it. What do you do when you find yourself in a totally new society? You're an immigrant. You have to learn the new language. Or you discover that there's a different religion that's running the show now. Or you discover that over there you were persecuted and now you're not. What do you do? There are actually three responses. You're in the lower box, right? That's the Jewish box. One response is to say, we're not going to change no matter what. All the old ways are what we want. That's like taking a deep dive into that lower box and living at the bottom level and paying no attention to society. You wall yourself off from society. You say, this is evil, we want nothing to do with it. We will still have a little ghetto. That is what we call ultra-Orthodoxy. And there are many examples of that today, as you well know. A second response is you sort of bubble up to the top of your box and you look out at society and you say, hey, this is cool. I like this. to the extent that you actually abandon the lower box and you say, I'll live in society. Who needs this Jewish stuff? That is called assimilation. More Jews have affiliated throughout history, more Jews have assimilated throughout history than we ever say. Because the rabbis never talked about them. They were embarrassed by them, so we don't have records. But modern historians rather believe there's a regular movement to assimilation in Catholic Spain, in medieval Germany, and so on. So what's left? What's left is a Reform response. Even before there's Reform Judaism officially in the 19th century, there is a point of view that is Reform. And that point of view says, we'll stick our head up, see what culture is like, and we'll learn it, and we'll live with it, and we'll kind of make a new arrangement with it. And we will come out with a stronger Judaism, a Judaism that's based on what we really need to carry forward, a Judaism that allows us to get rid of the old stuff that really isn't important anyway. And that is what becomes Reform Judaism then in the 19th century. So the 19th century is just the latest rerun of a long series of movements of Jews through history. In each case, 3 options. You can sink to the bottom and become ultra-Orthodox in some way, and usually there's no future for you. You're constantly there, but there's no real future in terms of gaining the majority of Jews. Or you can assimilate, in which case we lose those people. We are here because when Jews moved to America, they brought with them the latest example of Jews who said, we want both. One foot in regular society outside, one foot in Judaism. And so when Temple Emanu-El was formed in the early days, the Jews had to come to terms with what is America. America was nothing like Europe. They left Europe because they had no freedoms. They came here to be free to practice Judaism the way they wanted. And out came a variety of different responses. The best example of 19th century response in America is Temple Emanu-El. Look, this is the result of what those brave people did at the beginning, investing in Judaism for the future, in which you would be fully American and at the same time fully Jewish. Another example was conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism didn't really found itself until the Eastern European Jews came, not the German Jews. We are, by and large, descended from German Jews who came in the middle of the 19th century and pioneered Judaism here. Eastern European Jews came, but they had a different kind of Judaism to pioneer because they wanted to join their Judaism from Eastern Europe, which was not Central Europe, and make it American, and that became conservative Judaism. And modern Orthodoxy has many strands, but it's always the same question. How can I be fully Jewish and fully, in our case, American? I talked about movement changes before, all right? And I've talked about now how Judaism is a series of changes, and in each historical moment, we have 3 options, and one option, the Reform option, is to build something like this. But what I just said also, that conservative Judaism and modern Orthodoxy are options too. And so now I want to differentiate these 3 options, but tell you that in all cases, the issue is, how do we respond to a changing time? How do we meet the new moment? Emanu-El had to change. This is not exactly Emanu-El of 30 years ago, 40 years, certainly not 100 years ago. So changes occur here too. As America changes, and as the demography of Judaism changes, we change too. So I want to now look at the 3 options in terms of a chart that will help you understand more deeply what I'm talking about. And then at the end, I'm going to talk to you about Jewish history once again, and end up talking about what is Jewish history anyway? How do we fit into Jewish history in a deeper way? So that's where we're going. Any questions so far? Are you with me? Am I clear? On Yom Kippur, when I'm not eating, I'm never sure I'm talking straight. So, yes? Hold on a second. We only have one mic.
You were saying Jews adapt to society in sort of various, on a continuum.
Yes.
How has interfaith and gay marriage fit into that continuum?
Interfaith and intermarriage. There's a great example. How has interfaith and intermarriage, how has that fit into these changes? At some point in time, at the beginning, Jews were strange to Americans. And we tried to make our worship and our lives look like American lives so people would accept us. We were so successful that Jews became more and more interested in being Americans and could be full Americans. Once again, we had three options. If we had met Jews where they are in the 1980s, 1990s, and beyond, we could say to them, well, you have to be fully Jewish, and never mind, we don't do intermarriages and so on, in which case more people would assimilate. So eventually, Reform Judaism, which always asks the question of what are the important Jewish values? That's what we keep with us. What are not important and we can leave behind? Jewish values are having a Jewish home, continuing the Jewish people, building a new kind of Judaism that meets the moment for new generations. And at some point it occurred to us, beginning around the 1980s, that, hey, why not do intermarriages? So the old-fashioned, if I may say so, people said, no, it's forbidden. We said, well, lots of things are forbidden, but we do them now because we realize that we don't necessarily follow Jewish law entirely. We don't kick you out if you don't keep kosher. If you do, that's fine too. But we don't kick you out of a synagogue, as once upon a time they would. We allow you to get a general education and don't say, gee, that's not compatible with Judaism. So it was just a continuation of that openness. And we said openness to people in their new environment is part of what Judaism is. It reaches out. It brings people in. So it was just a continuation of the supreme values of Judaism and giving up the idea that it's just wrong to condemn intermarriage. All right, take a look at your chart. Oh, yeah, sorry. I can hear you. I'll repeat for people.
Just to put it in a bigger continuum, that after the destruction of the temple way back, the Jews had to rethink how are we going to meet
Yes.
Babylon. The Talmud may be the first reform movement.
Yes. So your point. Yes, your point. Perfect comment. In other words, to put it into greater context, when the temple was destroyed, we didn't say, oh, without a temple, we're going to die. We got to rebuild the temple. We said, well, the important thing is to be able to meet, to worship God, and to be a community. We can do that in synagogues. So all of a sudden, there's a synagogue movement. Exactly so. And when Jews moved to Babylonia, Babylonia was not Christian. It was not pagan. It was Zoroastrian. And it was a great empire. So they didn't say, well, we can only be Jews in Israel. They said, what would it look like to be Jews in Zoroastrian area? And Zoroastrians at the time were compiling their Zoroastrian code of law. They were writing their books. So the rabbi said, we can do that. And they built a Talmud. Exactly so. Pardon me? The Babylonian Talmud starts around around 200, and it's probably compiled eventually around 550 to 600. Okay, let's move on. Take a look at your charts. Does anybody not have them? Yeah, I don't have them. What did I do with mine? I got to find a chart. Hold on a minute. Thank you, Mark. Everybody got one? All right, this comes from a magnificent anthropologist whose name is Mary Douglas. Mary Douglas died, but recently. She taught in London, at the London School of Economics, became internationally famous, and I met her personally at one point because I had read her book, and in her book, she talked about something called grid group analysis. I have lived with this. It's the most profound understanding, I think, of groups and how groups form. So she asked the question, why do people change? Why do people do anything for anybody else, for that matter? Why do they join a group? Why aren't we all just individuals? And she comes up with two particular ideas. One of them is called grid. You'll see it on the left-hand margin. And that's the vertical axis. And the other one is called group. And that's the horizontal axis at the bottom. You can see that both axes are marked 0 to 10. I am so glad I took 10th grade geometry. So she says, some people join a group because they love the laws. They like the idea of knowing what to do when. And so some groups appeal to people because they are so serious about what the right and the wrong is. Because rules kind of hem you in, like brickwork, she calls that the grid score. So if you really join the group because you love the rules, you like being where rules matter, you think rules matter most, then you will find a group that really likes rules. As you see on the left-hand side, in our time, go from 0 to 10. You'll see a score of 10. Who's in that score of 10? Orthodoxy. Chabad, modern Orthodoxy. Ultra-Orthodoxy, the Haredi, the people in Israel who want to study Talmud all the time. They still live by Jewish law. That's what matters most. So there are some groups that like that, and this is who they are today. By contrast, one of the ways you might want to attract people is not by saying, boy, do we have great laws and rules here. It's saying, we have a wonderful group of people. You're going to like the people. That axis, as you see, is called group. Some people just want to hang out with other people. There's an old story about two Jews who go to shul, Orthodox shul, but they're not strictly Orthodox. And so one of them actually does like davening, and so goes to pray to God. The other guy is an atheist. He's decided there is no God. But he goes anyway. So Schwartz is the guy who goes to pray to God. Levine goes too. And finally his wife says to him, why are you going? You don't believe in davening, you don't believe in prayer, and you don't believe in God. And he says, well, Schwartz goes to talk to God, and I go to talk to Schwartz. Levine loves group. He'll even go to boring services for 3 hours on a Shabbat morning because he gets to talk to all the people there. I had an uncle just like that. He belonged to a large synagogue, where nobody knew what he was doing, and he could talk to the boys round about him every Shabbat morning. I don't think he prayed very much, but these were his people. So one way in which a group forms is it emphasizes group. And it emphasizes maybe not just a local group, but being part of a greater group. Now, it turns out that Eastern European Jews were group-oriented. You may have read the book a long time ago called Life is with People, the shtetl. Not everybody in the shtetl was Orthodox. Some of them were like Tevi the dairyman, who did what he had to, but, you know, he was becoming modern. And others just liked the fact that there was a community there. So you can have high group score, and those tend to be people who are conservative because they come from Eastern Europe. We'll ignore the ideas for a moment. Now, I want you just to look at the 4 quadrants with me. You can have a society, or any group for that matter, which is, take a look at quadrant 1, see it? It's going to be a high score on group, right, at the far right, but a very low score on grid at the bottom of the chart, right? What are some examples? One example is college roommates. College roommates aren't together because they love following all the rules of the college, believe me. But you know what? They're a group together, like family. They wear each other's clothes. They tell each other everything. And that's what matters to them, the small group of 2 or 3, depending on how many are in the dorm. It's also a breakaway sect. Throughout Jewish history or any religious history, if people break away, they tend to be small. They don't follow the rules because that's why they broke away. They didn't like the rules. So now, what's left? They love each other. The Havuram movement in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, if any of you go back that far, probably not, 90s maybe it was. I'll try to say 2000 so everybody can relate. This movement of small groups of just becoming, a little group of Jews, fine. But then what do? There's no rules. They just gave up the rules because they quit the organization. They have to develop their own rules. But at first, it's just us 10, 12, 15 people who meet in homes and have a great time together. It's all about friendships, right? Now go to quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 are societies or groups that are, because they have a high score in both. You following me? They have a high group and a high grid score. This is an organization that appreciates the rules, and yet they have wonderful personal relationships together. That's the healthiest kind of organization. Those organizations will last because they have rules enough to keep going. They're not always in conflict. They're not always wondering what to do about the next moment. They've got rules, constitution, and yet they like each other, and they know each other's names, and they care for one another. It is also a competent, caring business. A good business knows what it's trying to accomplish, and it has rules about how you can do about it. This is your job. That's her job. This is how you'll get ahead, and so on. And yet the people who work together like working together. They like going to work in the morning. They have both high grid and high group. Quadrant 3. Sometimes successful organizations in quadrant 2 lose the personal touch. Rules last because they're on paper. And there are people hired to keep the rules going. But if you lose the personal touch, what do you have left? What you have left is just the rules. I think of that as the IRS. I get letters once in a while from the IRS telling me I haven't paid or I should pay, or they wonder why I paid, or what's this or what's that. I quake whenever I get the letter. And the letter is signed by someone whose name is J. Somerville. There is no J. Somerville. It's a computer. And somebody's operating that computer in a little box, and someone else is in the other box. They don't necessarily know one another. They may even be, they're working, not even in the same building anymore. They don't have any sense of group. It's just a job. That's it. And they do it until they get tired of it and they do something else. The really best example is the Prussian bureaucracy. I've never been in Prussia, but I know what it means to have a Prussian bureaucracy, where everything gets done exactly right, but nobody has any particular care for the other person. Now take a look at quadrant 4, because that's important for us. When modernity hit, many Jews were cast adrift. They were tempted simply to leave Judaism altogether. What is it like to be Jewish when the ground is shaking below you? Everything is new. These are people who weren't sure what the rules were, and they weren't even sure what their group was anymore, because they were forming new groups as time went on. Most important, though, says Mary Douglas, the 4th quadrant is where people find themselves now. And that's the challenge now. People in America now, England, anywhere where modernity has struck, people now find themselves in what Douglas calls an entrepreneurial society. It's the very condition of modernity. Namely, you don't necessarily want to follow all the rules. Even in our society, you say, well, hey, I'm a New Yorker. I cross against the red light. I don't follow that rule. Every once in a while, I'm shocked. I go to a country where they make me stand on the curb when nothing's coming. But everybody does it. They follow the rules. Americans are not necessarily like that. In an entrepreneurial society, what you really want to do is get ahead as an individual. So Douglas talks about somebody who owns a shop on Main Street. The person who owns the shop belongs to an organization called the Better Business Bureau. In this little town, all the people who have stores meet together. You would think they're good buddies, because after all, they know each other's names. They wave across the street in the morning. But actually, if they could, they'd take over each other's businesses. So I say hello to the shoe dealer on the other side of the street. I sell shoes, but if I could, what if I had 2 shoe stores? So the entrepreneurial society rewards individualism to the point where people become lonely because there's no ongoing group to belong to in society. And they're all making up their own rules as much as they can. They'll do what they can get away with. In modern society, then, she says, the overwhelming crisis is the crisis of loneliness. The crisis of individuals who are getting on with their lives, keep very busy, but they don't necessarily feel they belong to a community. And they don't feel there are any rules that they really have to keep. And so they look for some kind of community with enough rules to make it a community, but where everybody knows your name. Remember Cheers? Now, that's where Reform Judaism in America comes in. Reform Jews are Jews who, not just here, but throughout time, Reform Jews are the ones who most appreciated the current condition of society. The ones who are willing to stretch their heads out into the host culture and form something altogether new. Conservative Jews, if you like, believe in the Jewish people. They're like pulling people out from point 0 on the graph. Come on, join us. We're the Jewish people. Orthodox Jews are up at the top, and they're pulling people out saying, hey, look, we got great rules. Join us. Reform Judaism stands with the people. We are the Jews who are most in the trenches of modernity, whatever modernity is, change. we appreciate change, and we are the people. We are those who appreciate the dilemmas of society most and are first to handle the great challenges of society. In Germany, we were the ones who said, we'll pray in the vernacular. We'll have an organ. How about that? We will form different kinds of associations. In America, we do the same sort of thing. So where is reform now? Reform stands at point zero. We know what point zero is. And we offer people ourselves as examples of what they can be. That's why intermarriage becomes a reform issue. We recognize the need for intermarriage before anybody does. Patrilineal descent. Orthodoxy tells you are Jewish only if your mother is Jewish. Reform said, wait a minute, half the people I know, the father is Jewish, the mother isn't. You mean they're not Jewish? So we said, we'll change. We will have patrilineal descent and matrilineal descent. Either parent is good enough for us. When challenges in society make people uncertain as to who they are, we're the first ones who will change Judaism to meet the moment. Because we stand with people at point zero. We are those people. We appreciate them. Now take a look at the rest of the chart. I've added one more thing. Do you see how rules, grid, can attract people? People who don't know what to do with their lives, find rules. Do you see that communities of meaning where you know people, they know your name, will attract you? That's the group. There's one other thing that attracts people, and that is great ideas. In fact, great ideas have consequence. Great ideas have moved people through time. Sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. Zionism in its time was a great idea, and it moved people. Democracy was a great idea, and it moved people. So there are actually three things that a modern synagogue has to be, and that Reform tries to do. Standing with the people at point zero, we say, hey, you know what? We have rules too. It's not all halakha. It's not all the rules about let's say, the Jewish law. But there are moral rules. And we believe in moral rules that you should follow. Come to us because you want to be a better moral human being. We attract people because we say, we have a community called a synagogue. Join us. You're welcome here. And we attract people also because historically, Reform Judaism is most willing to try out new ideas. A healthy synagogue, especially a healthy Reform synagogue, needs all three things. And that's what Emanu-El is trying to accomplish, and doing pretty well at it, I would say. If you look at the chart one more time, do you see WOM, bottom right? There are three things that people do. We behave, we belong, and we believe. The attraction of saying, these are the rules by which we live, every organization needs some, and every human being needs some. That's behaving. So we preach behavior. Moral behavior. Being kind to people, etc. Tzedakah. Later, the Philanthropic Committee will make a report today. That moves me always, that Emanu-El has such a thing. That's behaving. Belonging is, of course, group. And ideas are the third way that people are moved, and that's believing. Now, in fact, behaving, believing, and belonging have always mattered. But as Mary Douglas says, in our time, with so many people lost and lonely, at point zero. More and more, we demand synagogues that welcome people, help them to belong, tells them how to live a better life, behave, and challenges them with great ideas. Believe. Last, I said I would return to Jewish history one more time. You with me so far? Anything I've lost you on? So far so good? All right. So what is Jewish history anyway? Is there a shape to Jewish history? Well, Jewish historians think there should be, but they don't agree on what it is, which is why they all write different history books. When I was younger, I thought, why would I read a second history book? I already read one. I know the history. But it doesn't work that way. We are constantly trying to find new shapes in Jewish history. In the 19th and early 20th century, there were two major shapes. One was a major shape by someone named, someone who had studied with Hegel, had read Hegel. Now, Hegel is the kind of philosopher everybody talks about, but nobody actually reads, because he's impossible to read. But one thing I know about Hegel is he thought the universe was moving according to God's plan. And he thought you could look at history all over and see it all moving together the way God wanted it to. And it ended up, as he saw it, in the Prussian state, but we won't go there. The other historian disagreed. A second historian looked at Jewish history and said, that's not how it happens. It's not like all Jews move together through time according to a universal plan. No, it's local. And he thought there was a shape to Jewish history. Take a look at any Jewish society and you will see it's like a bell curve. It's a bell curve, right? Actually, I was going to put that on the chart, but I found I couldn't draw bells very well. So picture a bell curve, all right? The beginning of it is when Jews just arrive in a new place. A for arrive. Once they get there, they begin building institutions. Germans came here and they said, let's build Emanu-El. So as they go up the curve, more and more people are there, they organize, and they build an institution. B for building. That's the second stage. Eventually, we reach the top of the curve, which could last for a long time. It doesn't just necessarily fall right away. Every Jewish society has done this. When you reach the top of the curve, now you have creativity, Jewish creativity. See, it works out. C for creativity. Eventually, in history, it declines. And as the curve goes down, you get D for decline. But as declining happens in one center of Judaism, somewhere else they're building up. So Jews leave point A, and they move to point B, and they start all over again. Whenever there's a move like that, we face a new environment, and that's where the reform attitude matters. We say, we want to be at home here. We will change things so that we can be both Jewish and at home in the new curve. So, where are we today? Well, the first challenge was just being American and Jewish. It was not clear at the very beginning that could happen. And we proved it could. And the 19th century was a time when we built institutions like Emanu-El, and we started into what I think is a period of creativity. Think of all the Jews who belonged to this synagogue and impacted America. We are now in a second part of that curve, because the challenges today are different. So it's as if we began the creative period, and now there's fluctuations. And we're living now in a really different era. It's an era of today, whatever that means. You know it better than I do, though I know it too, because I'm a Reformed Jew, and Reformed Jews, remember, we're the ones who know what's going on out there in the hustings better than anybody else. It's challenging us in numerous ways. We have responded in creative ways to keep the creativity going. Intermarriage, patrilineal consent, stressing the moral values. As we heard today in the sermon, talking about what are the values of kindness and generosity and so on. And the question is, how long can this creativity last? Well, a lot depends on us, and a lot depends on American society. It lasts as long as we're welcome here and as long as America is creative. So here on Yom Kippur, I find myself, as I do every year, thinking about my own life and thinking about the future. And I think we're going through difficult times right now in America. We all know that. Challenges, polarization, anger, shootings, all sorts of terrible things. But then I think about Jewish history. And I say, you know, we Jews have been here before, even if it was there, not here. This is not the first time we face challenges. And I have faith that we will get through our times, that somehow we'll manage to figure this out. I believe that America is a great, great country. I believe that it will survive. And I believe Jewish people here in America, we are a great, great people. And I believe we will survive. And that creativity, this intersection of the host society and Jewish culture, that still continues. I think then that Reformed Judaism, more than any other, though I appreciate the others, but I'm a Reformed Jew, I think Reformed Judaism matters most. And that's why I still belong. And that's why I think it matters to have denominations. Now, if you just go to temple on occasion, never think about it, and why should you? I mean, you have busy lives. I get paid to think about this. Well, at least think about this. I'm not sure I still get paid. I'm retired. But that's what I do. I think of great ideas. I think of what Reformed Judaism is. If you're Jewish and you want to live fully American and you want to be responsive to the challenges and you want most to bring Jewish culture and Jewish values into your American Jewish life, that's where we are. We are at the cutting edge always. I don't think anything survives without a cutting edge. We are the cutting edge of Judaism. We have always been that. We called it a movement at one point, and we are that today. We matter because we are the cutting edge of Judaism. New ideas, new ways of meeting, new ways of thinking through what the rules are, new ways of attracting young people, particularly, though I have nothing against old people, trust me, been able to attract people because we are true to who we are, the cutting edge of Judaism in a changing America. Thank you. Yes, we have time for questions. Good. 1, 2.
Thank you. Interesting, Rabbi.
Give me your name.
Rick Solomon.
Thanks, Rick.
I listened to the 4 quadrants, and I'm trying to find where I fit in. As a Reformed Jew, it would appear I'm in quadrant 4, but it moves with the ideas. So I wonder if there should be more stratifications, because identifying for myself only, you know, I believe in a reform movement. I believe in some rules. I believe in assimilating to a degree. But I also, like Rabbi Sapatin this morning, believe in inclusiveness. And heavy tikkun olam, which is in part why I do many programs at the Stryker Center and 92nd Y and otherwise. Where do I fit in?
Well, you fit in perfectly to this moment in time, don't you? Let's differentiate the institution from the individual. Institutions were built a long time ago. So we have institutions that were built in the 19th century here, and the question is how to move them through the 20th century and to move it to the moment. You mentioned Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is a rather modern reform idea, and it's one more example of an idea that moves people, but an idea that occurred to us because we said, you know what matters most are our values. One value is obviously helping the world. We believe in that. Reform Judaism, therefore, recognizing the need to re-emphasize what was important and get rid of some of the unimportant things, chose that as one of their values. And that's what attracts you. You are here at this synagogue because you like the way it works. You like Yom Kippur. That's a rule. You go on Yom Kippur. And you presumably like the people whom you meet here. That's your group. And you hope for new ideas. That's why you listen to sermons like the one you listened to this morning. So the institution can be in quadrant 2, but human beings in America constantly face meaninglessness. We know that's true. We're looking for lives of meaning. Meaning is when everything fits together and you know you matter. And so I think people today on an individual scale are still at the quadrant 4. And that's why there's so much suicide. And that's why people are acting out their frustrations. And that's why more and more people belong to less and less. Remember that book called Bowling Alone? People don't join things anymore. Temple Emanu-El reaches out and says to those people, you can have a life of meaning here, and that's what you're finding, I would say. Though you're the expert at you, not me, so I hope I got it somewhat right anyway.
Hi, my name is Kaylin. The first half of your conversation, you talked a lot about culture, a French Jew versus a German Jew versus an Eastern European Jew. Now, America is a very large country. I am from Omaha, Nebraska, and I am not a New York Jew in any of the slightest in the sense, and we all very much know that, just like you are. You guys here are not Midwestern Jews. How do you think the different regional cultures of America have affect the reform movement in America?
What a great question. First of all, I commend you on being from Omaha, which is one of the great Jewish communities of our country, actually. I could go on and on about that. But a great number of Jews have come from Omaha who have impacted America. And I know the Reform Synagogue there anyway really, really well. And it's a great place. So Reform Judaism really began as a Midwestern phenomenon. That's because it was founded by someone in Cincinnati. And at that point, Cincinnati was the, what do they call it, the Queen City or something of the West. That was where everything was supposed to grow. That was going to be the center of the country. Only it turned out it didn't become that. For a variety of reasons, New York became that, and the East Coast became that. And so there was then a different kind of Judaism beginning in New York. And they were not always at peace with one another because they had different cultures. This happens all the time, obviously. In America as a whole, the Civil War was fought between two different cultures in America. So the question is, do the different cultures appreciate one another so that they can learn from one another and so that they can thrive? So you can visit here in New York, and even though you're not a New York Jew, I hope we're being kind to you and so forth, and you'll go back with a good report. Or are we at each other's throats? Because we want to listen to one another. We think our way of doing things is the only way of doing things. Or because we have a complete difference of values. Well, the complete difference of values leads to civil war. That's what happened in the Civil War. Jews tend not to have a complete difference of values. One of our values is Jewish peoplehood. And so we're trained at how to understand many different kinds of Jews. I actually think that Judaism in America has been enriched by what Midwesterners have given us. Chicago is its own culture, by the way. It's not really the Midwest, but Chicago has given us a great deal. California is its own world as well. But West Coast Judaism, we have many different Judaisms here, and what we try to do in Reform is say, hey, we're all part of the same movement, and since no matter where we live in America, we as individuals tend towards meaninglessness at the fourth quadrant, we come together and we try to build a Jewish community that's not just our synagogue, but is nationwide. And actually, if I predict, I will, because I've got the microphone, so there you go, you're stuck. I think we are now at the beginning of a new era in which American Judaism will reach out and begin to formulate a very proud and lively diaspora Judaism in general. This is not in opposition to Israel. I'm a Zionist, I believe in Israel. But I think Jewish people have always been an ellipse. They've been two centers. One center is Israel, the other center is the diaspora. Usually one place in the diaspora is prouder, stronger than the others, that's us. But now we have this technology to help other diasporas. And I think the future is not just Midwest and Eastern Judaism, it's Judaism here and Judaism in England and Judaism in France, and there are struggling reform movements there. And I think the future is our influencing them and helping to develop a worldwide Judaism that is like, not with their own version of it, but that is true to the reform basis of being in the trenches with people, new ideas, and so on. And they need us badly, so I think we need to reach out.
I think it's important to note that we are out there in the Midwest deeply thankful whenever you guys move out there and open a bagel shop as well. We have one in Omaha, and it's always sold out. So thank you guys for your bagels, always.
Anything else you'd like us to do for you other than bagels? Yeah, it's 12:30.
Question. Could you discuss the differentiation between assimilationists and acculturationists?
Perfect question. In fact, you anticipated what I wanted to do and forgot to, so thank you. When I talked about the three ways of responding, remember, sticking your head out and so on and so forth. So one way is, remember that's the ultra-Orthodox way where you say, I want nothing of the above. I want only old Judaism. Everybody else is a sinner. The other two ways are assimilation, where you leave Judaism altogether, or what Reform is, we are acculturators. Acculturation is to accept the culture and love it in which you live, and yet find how Judaism meets that culture and how we can build our lives together, one foot in one culture, one foot in the other, each one informing the other and making the other stronger. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for coming. I always love it when you come, and you're very kind to give me this hour and coming to hear me talk. And I'm getting to know you by now, which is really great. I hope we'll live another many, many years, just so I can really get to know you. I wish you a meaningful Yom Kippur as you find your way to the next stage in your life, as you think about what really matters to you. And I thank you for taking this hour out to help make your trip through Yom Kippur somewhat richer. Thank you.